I'll never forget the day Karen from the HOA decided my front door was a menace. I was still sitting on my worn-out couch, sipping my morning coffee, when I got that email from her. A formal, frosty message stating that my door color was lowering property values, and that I had exactly 7 days to repaint it to something more acceptable. I couldn't help but laugh aloud at the absurdity of it all. I mean, I'd seen everything from our little suburban street, from outrageous lawn ornaments to mismatched window treatments. But never had I imagined my door would be the battleground for an aesthetic war. I stared at the email over and over again, the words burning into my brain. Lower property values, fines, and arbitrary standards that made no sense to me. That moment was like a spark catching dry wood. I knew I had two choices: conform to a rule that I found laughable, or take a stand and show that our community wasn't going to be bullied by Karen's petty whims. I decided to talk to my neighbors. I knocked on the door of the house next door, the one with the ginger cat always lounging in the window, and I casually mentioned the HOA's ridiculous demands. To my relief and surprise, I wasn't alone. The neighbor confessed, with a wry smile, that she'd been hassled about the type of mailbox she had chosen. Another neighbor, who had always been a quiet presence on our block, admitted that Karen had reprimanded him last month for having inappropriate wind chimes that dangled cheerfully in the morning breeze. Before long, it seemed that each door on our street had its own little story of Karen's curfew of taste, a series of petty infractions that she levied on anyone daring to express a bit of character on their property. My irritation grew, but so did my determination. I realize, Ed, this was more than just about a paint color. It was about reclaiming our right to be ourselves in our own homes. I sat down at my desk, took a deep breath, and drafted a plan. I began designing a simple flyer on my aging computer. "Paint your door for Freedom Day," it read, adorned with a splash of rebellious color that defied Karen's bland palette. I printed out a stack of flyers and spent that evening going door to door, slipping them under doorbells, and handing them directly to neighbors with a reassuring smile. "It's time to take back our street," I said, my voice steady with newfound resolve. Some of them hesitated at first, unsure if a little rebellion was worth risking further attention from the HOA. But as I explained how absurd it was to be fined for a door's color, and how much fun it could be to all join in a collective act of defiance, they started nodding enthusiastically. Soon enough, my personal grievance transformed into something much bigger, a community movement fueled by our shared frustration and the desire to keep our homes as expressions of who we truly are. The big day arrived, with the sun barely peeking over the horizon. I woke up before dawn, the crisp morning air mixing with my excitement and nerves. I recall watching the neighborhood gradually come to life. One by one, families emerged with paint cans in hand and rollers tucked under arms, determined to join the cause. Children laughed as they played in the soft light of early morning, their innocent excitement fueling the rebellious spirit of the day. I remember the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the warmth of shared smiles that replaced the cold indifference usually associated with HOA meetings or rules. Everybody had a friend, grumpy old man, as they watched laugh lit up one by one, their innocent excitement fueling the rebellious spirit of the day. I remember the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the warmth of shared smiles that replaced the cold indifference usually associated with HOA meetings or rules. I remember the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the warmth of shared smiles that replaced the cold indifference usually associated with HOA meetings or rules. I remember the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the warmth of shared smiles that replaced the cold indifference usually associated with HOA meetings. I remember the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the warmth. Community spirit outweighed any arbitrary rule that tried to dictate our lives. I started at my own door, which had become the symbol of our small revolution. I took a deep breath as I rolled the paint onto the surface, each brush stroke a silent act of resistance. As I painted, I could almost feel the weight of Karen's oppressive rules lifting away. The sound of laughter and the chatter of friendly neighbors filled the air. I heard snippets of conversations that made me smile. One neighbor cheerfully announced, "I've never had so much fun painting my door," while another remarked, "It's like we're creating a work of art right here on our street." The simple act of choosing a color, something as mundane as a decision on a front door, became a powerful statement about individuality and community strength. Midway through the day, as the vibrant hue spread down the row of houses, I spotted Karen herself coming down the sidewalk, clad in a sharply pressed blouse and clutching her phone like a life preserver. She looked every bit the stern enforcer of conformity. I remember feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and anxiety as she stormed by, her eyes scanning the transforming street, clearly incredulous at what she saw. In my heart, I knew that Karen was witnessing, perhaps for the first time, a community uniting to defy a set of rules that were never meant to dampen our spirits. Her presence only added fuel to our fire. And though I felt a pang of unease at confronting someone in authority, I was determined to stand my ground. Karen's reaction was instantaneous. Within minutes, the usually calm street was filled with the sound of raised voices and indignation. I later learned that she had attempted to call an emergency board meeting right then and there, attempting to reverse the momentum of our movement. I recall a neighbor saying calmly, "I guess she didn't plan for a block full of determined residents." I couldn't help but chuckle at the image of Karen, desperately trying to reinstate her rules while surrounded by a joyful, resolute community. I took a moment to step back from my brush and surveyed the scene. Families, couples, seniors, all united in this unlikely protest, their actions saying far more than any email or memo ever could. As the day unfolded, our street transformed into an open-air festival of defiance and camaraderie. I remember running into Mr. Reynolds, the elderly gentleman known for his perpetual scowl and tight-lipped demeanor. In a rare moment of levity, he joined our ranks, meticulously taping off the edges of his door with the precision of a seasoned carpenter. I even caught him muttering under his breath, "Well, if it's what it takes to put an end to this madness." His small act of participation was emblematic of the widespread sentiment simmering beneath the surface. A collective refusal to be dictated by outdated rules and oppressive authority. Neighbors who had once exchanged nods in polite silence now laughed, joked, and even shared stories of past grievances with the HOA, each tale weaving into the larger tapestry of our rebellion. The community event quickly became more than just a protest. It evolved into a celebration of diversity, creativity, and the right to personal expression. I remember one neighbor who had always been quirky in the best way imaginable, adding a flourish to his door by crafting a mural around the paint job. His door became not just a statement of rebellion, but a work of art that drew admiring glances from anyone passing by. In the midst of all the activity, children turned the day into a playful adventure, darting from house to house with toy paintbrushes, mimicking the actions of their parents in a game of pretend. The energy was palpable, contagious, the kind that lifts your heart and makes you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself. Of course, no great rebellion is without its moments of tension. I recall one particular instance when a heated debate broke out between a group of neighbors and a few staunch traditionalists who believed that deviating from the expected norm would ultimately tarnish the neighborhood's image. I found myself stepping in, my heart pounding with the responsibility of keeping the peace. I explained in as calm a tone as I could muster that our protest wasn't about causing chaos or undermining the community. It was about celebrating our individuality while coming together in solidarity. I shared with them how the arbitrary decisions imposed by the HOA were not meant to serve us, but to control us, and that our act of painting our doors was a reclaiming of our personal spaces. One by one, the resistance melted away, replaced by tentative smiles and nods of understanding. It was a turning point, not just in the protest, but in the way we saw ourselves as a community. We were a family that had been pushed into conformity for too long, and here we were, boldly reclaiming the right to express our true selves. Throughout the day, as I moved from one house to the next, I noticed more and more evidence of the subtle yet powerful change taking place. I saw a neighbor who had once been ostracized for her unconventional garden designs, now laughing with a newfound confidence as she painted her door, sharing lighthearted banter with those passing by. I even observed the once dour mailman pausing his route to admire tea. His colorful display, his usually impassive face breaking into a rare, genuine smile. Every brushstroke, every can of paint, and every shared laugh was a reminder that sometimes the simplest acts of defiance did have the most profound impact. By the time the sun began to set, our street had transformed into a living, breathing canvas of rebellion. I stood in front of my own door, a door that had once been a point of contention, and marveled at how far we had come in just one day. There was something deeply satisfying in knowing that what had started as a personal affront had evolved into a communal declaration of freedom. I couldn't help but reflect on how absurd it was that we had ever allowed a single opinion, no matter how forcefully expressed, to define the character of our homes. In that moment, I realized that the true beauty of our neighborhood wasn't found in uniformity dictated by, a set of outdated rules, but in the vibrant tapestry of personalities and stories that each home represented. As night fell and the excitement began to settle, I took a quiet walk down our now transformed block. The sight of all those matching door colors, glowing softly under the street lamps, filled me with a sense of pride and accomplishment. I found myself thinking about the nature of community and how easily we can be drawn into disputes that seem monumental at the time, only to discover that unity and shared purpose can dissolve even the most rigid boundaries. I recalled the words of a neighbor who had remarked earlier, "We're not just painting doors, we're painting our destiny." That phrase lingered in my mind, a poetic reminder that sometimes the most ordinary actions can have extraordinary consequences. In the days that followed, the impact of our collective act became clear. The local news picked up the story. 2 or 3 outlets mentioned it, highlighting it as an example of grassroots community spirit standing up to bureaucratic overreach. I remember watching a segment on TV where an anchor, with a wry smile, commented on how our neighborhood had inadvertently become the poster child for creative protest. While some critics argued that our actions were a mere stunt, to me it was proof that when people come together for a common cause, even the most absurd regulations can be challenged. The HOA, which had once seemed so formidable with its endless memos and strict enforcement, now found itself scrambling to justify its position. In a surprising twist, the board convened an emergency meeting and, after much debate, quietly amended the rules to allow more flexibility in front-facing aesthetics. Rumor had it that Karen herself took an unexpected step back, Ma'am her roll on the board shortly after, perhaps realizing that her days of micromanaging every detail were numbered. I can still recall the mixture of exhilaration and relief that washed over me when I heard the news. It wasn't just about the door color anymore. It was about reclaiming our sense of agency. I sat on my front porch that evening, watching as the neighborhood slowly returned to its routine, but with something distinctly different in the air. It was as if we had all shared an unspoken understanding, a moment in time where we chose unity over conformity. Friends I'd made only that day continued to exchange contact information, promising to organize community events and keep the spirit of our rebellion alive. There was talk of future projects, of crafting even more creative ways to show that the true strength of a neighborhood lies not in rigid rules, but in the courage of its residents to express themselves freely. Looking back now, I realize that those few hours were transformative, not just for our street, but for me personally. I had faced down an oppressor in the form of an overzealous HOA official and emerged not only unscathed, but empowered by the collective strength of my community. Every time I pass by my front door, I'm reminded of that extraordinary day, of the laughter, the shared determination, and the undeniable proof that when we band together, we can turn any situation around. The door, once a symbol of a petty regulation, had been transformed into a beacon of hope and individuality. And in that transformation, I found a deeper meaning, that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can lead to monumental change. There were moments of self-doubt during the campaign, moments when I wondered if I had bitten off more than I could chew. I thought of the times when I hesitated, worried that speaking out might isolate me or paint a target on my back. But each time I doubted. I remembered the countless stories of neighbors who had silently suffered under those arbitrary rules. Stories of quiet frustration and dreams of a neighborhood free from the heavy-handed grip of conformity. That recollection steeled my resolve. I realized that by standing up for my own small right to choose, I was also standing up for everyone else who had ever been told that their style, their choices, or their personal expressions didn't matter. I also learned that solidarity is a powerful force. In the hours before our paint revolution, I had never imagined that such a simple idea could unite a community so completely. Yet there we were, a seemingly mismatched group of individuals coming together for a shared vision, a vibrant mosaic that symbolized more than just matching door colors. It was a declaration that our homes were our sanctuaries, and no one, not even someone like Karen, had the right to dictate how we expressed ourselves within them. Every conversation, every shared laugh, and every moment of hesitation overcome had built toward that one stunning display of defiant unity. Over time, our neighborhood began to change in small ways that were not immediately visible to the outside world. Neighbors who had rarely spoken now organized weekend barbecues, outdoor movie nights, and even little art projects on their driveways. The success of our door painting day had sparked a broader transformation, one in which our community began to value genuine connection and creativity over rigid adherence to outdated rules. I found myself more invested than ever in our little street, not just as a place to live, but as a living testament to the power of collective action. I'd often sit on my porch in the evenings, watching as familiar faces strolled by, exchanging friendly waves and warm greetings. That sense of belonging, that feeling of being part of something bigger than any one individual, became the most lasting reward of all. In the quiet moments that followed our grand protest, I sometimes caught myself lost in reflection, wondering what else could be accomplished when we're willing to challenge the norm. I thought about all those times I had sat back, resigned to accepting the status quo, and I promised myself never again to let fear or indifference keep me from speaking out. That day, amidst the splashes of paint and echoes of laughter, I had discovered a renewed sense of purpose, a belief that even in a world obsessed with uniformity, there was always room for originality and free expression. Now, whenever I walk through our neighborhood and see the sea of matching doors, I am filled with a quiet pride. It's a daily reminder that change is possible, that passion and resolve can transform even the most mundane aspect of life into something extraordinary. I still hear whispers of that day, stories told with a mix of amusement and reverence. New residents marvel at the legacy of our rebellion, and old-timers smile knowingly, as if to say, that was the day we showed them what it really means to live in a community. For me, each time I glance at my door, I remember the initial shock of receiving that email and the burning fire that led me to stand up and say, enough is enough. I remember the courage it took to challenge not just an overzealous bureaucrat, but a whole system that had long forgotten what it meant to serve its people. I remember the laughter that rippled through the neighborhood as rules crumble, deep beneath the weight of our collective will. And so, whenever someone tries to tell me, or anyone else, that our personal choices should be governed by an outdated rulebook, I smile and think back to that extraordinary day. I know that sometimes the most radical actions begin with something as simple as picking up a paintbrush. I've learned that real change doesn't always come from grand gestures or sweeping reforms, but from the small, everyday acts of rebellion that remind us we have the power to shape our surroundings. I encourage everyone who's ever felt marginalized by an arbitrary rule to find their own way to speak out. Whether it's a splash of color on a front door, a bold mural on a wall, or any act of defiance that celebrates who you are, do it, embrace it, own it. Every time I think back on that day, I feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the victory over petty fines and oppressive rules, but for the bonds that were forged in the heat of rebellion. I found a community that was ready to support and uplift one another, a family bound by the shared belief that our homes, our expressions, and our identities were sacred. We didn't need permission to be ourselves. We didn't need a set of draconian guidelines to dictate the color of our souls. We had each other, and that was more than enough. Looking into the future, I can't help but wonder what other creative ways we might find to challenge the status quo. The success of our door painting day has sparked conversations about other ways to reclaim our neighborhoods, to break free from outdated norms and embrace innovation and self-expression. I see a future where our community continues to thrive on its uniqueness, where every new idea is celebrated instead of stifled by red tape. I believe that our It'll revolution has shown that even in the face of bureaucratic overreach, there's always hope for change. And every time I walk past those matching doors, I remember the courage it took to say no to conformity and yes to individuality. In the end, this isn't just a story about a door's color. It's a story about the power of unity, the importance of community, and the belief that sometimes the smallest actions can make the biggest difference. I stand here, a proud participant in a movement that started with a simple act of defiance and grew into something that transformed not only my front door, but the very fabric of our neighborhood. I encourage you, whether you're watching this as a neighbor in your own community or someone far removed from such petty battles, to take a moment and celebrate your own uniqueness. Remember, it's your individuality that makes the world so rich and vibrant. Little Revolution has shown that even in the face of bureaucratic overreach, there's always hope for change. And every time I walk past those matching doors, I remember the courage it took to say no to conformity and yes to individuality. In the end, this isn't just a story about a door's color. It's a story about the power of unity, the importance of community, and the belief that sometimes the smallest actions can make the biggest difference. I stand here, a proud participant in a movement that started with a simple act of defiance and grew into something that transformed not only my front door, but the very fabric of our neighborhood. I encourage you, whether you're watching this as a neighbor in your own community or someone far removed from such petty battles, to take a moment and celebrate your own uniqueness. Remember, it's your individuality that makes the world so rich and